Good morning and welcome to this webinar series. Before we commence, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're all meeting on today. For me, it's the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. So this webinar series showcases the research undertaken by non-government AOD treatment services and their research partners as part of the AOD Early Intervention and Innovation Grant Round. So today, I'm very happy to welcome Professor Nadine Ezard and Peter Middleton from St. Vincent's Alcohol and Other Drug Services, who are going to be presenting on their research, the feasibility and efficacy of the S-Check app, a harm reduction and early intervention smartphone application for methamphetamine use. Thank you very much, Nadine.
Thanks, Rob and Susie and Peter, and welcome to everyone who's online with us today. I'm presenting on behalf of our whole team, and the authors on this presentation are Florence Bascombe, who I do need to thank because she did prepare most of these slides, Peter, who's with us today, Krista Seafried, Brendan Clifford, Jess Wilson, who's been working on the qualitative data, Shijin Liu, who worked on the quantitative data, and Francis K. Lamkin, who's our senior academic partner and was going to join us today, but because of COVID, hasn't been able to join us. But it is a big collective effort, and we'll go through that in a minute. The app was developed with an advisory group, including ACON, the Albion Centre, and Dan Herman, who actually designed the original pilot app himself when he used to work with us at St. Vincent's, and a whole range of other people that you can see there. And I want to just give a big thanks to everybody, because this has been a long journey. We've been working together on this now. The pilot version of the app was 2017, so we've been working on this now for a while. Just by way of background, I think most people who are here today will be aware that Australia has one of the highest prevalences of amphetamine dependence in the world. And this is reflected in increasing numbers of presentations to treatment services. And proportionally, methamphetamine now accounts for almost a third of all treatment episodes, second only to alcohol, and it's up from 9% 10 years ago. So people are increasingly seeking treatment for methamphetamine. But we do know also there's a treatment delay, and this data from a paper that's published almost 10 years ago now from a small sample in treatment is pretty much the only data we have on treatment delays. But it looks like there's around a 10-year gap between when people first start having problems related to regular use to seeking treatment. And we need to close that gap, because there's a lot of problems to individuals, their families, their communities that can occur over that 10-year period. And we know there are treatments, and we know that they're effective for many people. So we need to get that message out and get people engaged in treatment. The barriers to treatment are really quite well known. We know that time demands, cost demands, access to treatment, the actual availability of treatment, social supports, the need for anonymity and confidentiality, given it's a stigmatized and illegal behavior. The kind of pre-treatment characteristics of methamphetamine use, so people who use more frequently or more dependently might be less likely to access treatment. Some of the treatment services have quite strict admission criteria, and shame and stigma is itself a barrier to treatment. And we know even where there are treatments available, lack of motivation, and importantly, a perception of non-problematic use amongst people with methamphetamine dependence. And we know that from the Brendan Quinn and colleagues study in Melbourne with a cohort of people who use methamphetamine regularly, that one of the main reasons for people not seeking treatment, even where they scored positively on the severity of dependence scale, and even where they had actually had problems related to their use, like an admission for a drug-induced psychosis, didn't recognise that there was a problem related to their use. And this was reflected also in our S-Check clinic evaluation by Lauren Brenner and her team, which showed that one of the main reasons that people didn't come for treatment was because they didn't recognise that they had a problem, even though the scores, the kind of objective measures that we might use as a clinician, suggest that there might be problems related to use. So using a kind of theoretical model of behaviour, e-health behaviour management, We sought to adapt the S-Check clinic that we'd been running for some years, that was not a treatment so much as a low threshold intervention, where people had an assessment of their use and feedback about their use and problems that they may be getting, or not problems, but having people understand in context around their use and how that was affecting their lives. We adapted that into an app version using this kind of e-health behaviour management model framework, which draws from trans-theoretical models of behaviour change, which many people will be familiar with, the Prochaska and De Clementi model wheel of pre-contemplative through to action stages of change, and theories of planned behaviour, ecological momentary interventions, which allows for the matching health assessments and relevant information at the time that people complete it, and persuasive communication. So we brought all that together into an app, which we saw as a harm reduction and early intervention app to engage not in treatment people who use methamphetamine in treatment. And it was, as I said, based on the clinic that we'd been running for some years. And Dan Herman ran a pilot in 2017 to design the app and to test the acceptability and the usability, which showed favourable results. So we felt then that we had sufficient information and support to go forward with the study of the app, and we were fortunate to be funded by New South Wales Health through the EIIF, the Early Intervention Innovation Fund, to progress this study. And the two main objectives. So this is not, we're not providing an app that's eCBT, or not providing an app that helps people change their use. We're providing an app to help people learn about their use, and if it's problematic for them, motivate behaviour change. We also wanted to see what features of people using the app might encourage people to use the app more frequently or more readily. So whether that would be by sex or gender or sexuality or age of first use or frequency of use. So we wanted to look at those predictors. We had a whole range of secondary objectives, including the most commonly used features for future design, relationship between readiness to change, help seeking, and methamphetamine use and the duration that people were in the app, people's experience of using the app, and then as a secondary outcome, looking to see if there were any differences in changes of days use of methamphetamine use, but with the expectation that we would not see any difference from this particular app. The primary purpose was to motivate treatment seeking. We also wanted to see if this kind of study design that was an online and anonymous study with online recruitment, informed consent, and a waitlist control, whether that was feasible and acceptable to people. So we established this app that people actually download the app. There's an anonymous automated e-consent process. People then got an offer for a voucher if they completed day 28, day 56 assessments. And then if they volunteered for an interview, at that point, they would have to provide an email address or a telephone number so we could contact them. That was then deleted afterwards. They would also get $20, and we had ethics approval for this trial. The post of, some people may have seen this at AppStat a couple of years ago, on the process of incorporating automated consent procedure into an app, that we thought was quite an interesting and novel way of recruiting people into study. And then we launched the app. People who are over 18 who had used methamphetamine within the previous 4 weeks before the study were eligible. They needed to also be currently residing in Australia and had access to their own smartphone for the duration of the trial, so either Android or Apple. We recruited through a range of sources, so posters and flyers through alcohol and other drug services, paid advertising on social media like Facebook, Grindr, Recon, Scruff, and alcohol and other drug service user forums like Blue Light. These previous methods were found to be successful. In our case, we did have some difficulties with paid advertising, particularly from social media that was based with servers based in the US, and actually towards the end of the recruitment period, every morning in the US, the ad was taken down from Grindr, and every morning in Australia we had to put it back up again. So I think that's going to be increasingly an issue with recruiting through some of the social media services as we go forward with this kind of research. This very busy slide explains the process. So people download the app, they then see the trial information and the participant information sheet. They consent online, I agree. At that point, if they don't consent, then that's the end, the app's frozen. If they do consent, then they're screened for eligibility. If they're eligible, they have baseline data collection. They're then automatically randomized to the intervention. So they get access to the app for 28 days to use it as much as they like, or the waitlist control. We then do the day 28 data collection online, which is a repeat of the survey, that and get a voucher at that point if they complete that. And then for the intervention group, they can keep using the app if they want. For the delayed group, at that point, they get 20-day access. There's an optional telephone interview conducted at that point. And then at day 56 is the next lot of data collection, and then the app is disabled. I say it's disabled. We've learned that on Google Store, once people have downloaded the app, they can do what they like with it. It doesn't actually have a capacity to be automatically disabled. So potentially there are some people that may still have access to this app. This is what it looked like. Once they've completed their baseline questionnaire, they get this pie, they can spin it around and look at the different aspects of it. So there are different features. People can get immediate help, they get up-to-date information, they can download a referral letter to the GP, they can check which resources they need. There's automatic, and they can click through to immediate help through various helplines if they want. They can also track how they're feeling, what they're using, and record when, at moments that they feel like writing, to track the use and impacts of methamphetamine use over time. And the various features, the 6 domains that we look at, and each of these domains use a structured assessment tool that's in the public domain. So the severity of dependence scale, the K10, the patient health questionnaire, GAD-7, World Health Organization quality of life scale and wellbeing index, a sort of bespoke psychosocial assessment tool, quality of life in neurological disorders, cognitive function tool, because many people who use methamphetamine have told us they're concerned about their cognition and how they would like to track their cognitive function. And finally, a psychosis screener as well. The outcome measures that we use for the primary measures were intention to seek help. So that was divided into the actual help seeking questionnaire, which we modified to professional or non-professional, and then the recent help seeking behaviour to the general help seeking questionnaire, again, professional and non-professional, as well as a modified readiness to change ruler with a score of 0 to 10. And qualitatively, we did thematic coding of one-on-one semi-structured telephone interviews. We recruited from the start of September through till the 3rd of May, which, if you want to do the maths, it means that the last day 28 data point was at the end of May, and the last day 56 will actually be next week. So this is extremely preliminary data that I'm presenting to you. There were a total of 259 who consented and were randomised, 142 into the immediate access group and 117 into the delayed access group. Perhaps unsurprisingly for an app intervention, the retention was only 30%, and we'd actually gone into this study with the assumption that we'd have 50% retention, but we were perhaps a bit naive in that, and the field's moved along a little bit, and certainly 30% seems fairly predictable now in the current climate. Interestingly, we did get people staying on in the delayed access group, which I am pretty pleased with. We did have messages saying, please stay on, and reminder messages, and people were pretty keen to see what it looked like when they finally got there. When we looked at who downloaded the app, the majority identified as male, and when we drilled down a little bit into the data by gender and sexuality, the majority, just over 50%, were cis gay men, with the next most common group cis heterosexual women. The mean age was 38, which is pretty similar to the clinic that we run, the SCheck clinic, the similar mean age. The mean past days of methamphetamine use in the past 28 days was 15, but those data are very skewed. So there's quite some clumping of people that are using daily or almost daily that I'll come to later when we talk about this, whether this is an early intervention tool or not. The mean age of first use is about 26, again, similar to the S-Check clinic that we run, so similar population in that sense. University educated people with about 36%. The Australian 39% of the Australian population is university educated, a stat that is slightly surprising to me. But one of the concerns we had was that maybe this tool would be only interesting to people who were very literate, but there were a quarter of the sample didn't finish high school, and the majority of the sample, their highest education was high school. So it isn't just attracting the university educated. And pleasingly, 60% of people hadn't had treatment before for their methamphetamine use, which is higher than the S-Check clinic, which was less than half of the population. 48% hadn't had treatment before. So it's pleasing that we're attracting that group of people. And interestingly, more than half of the population, the sample population, had reported intravenous drug use in the past 28 days. So that kind of fits with the more severe end of the disorder spectrum, potentially, if people are using frequently and injecting. There was no significant difference between the two groups on any characteristic, and then Shijin, the statistician, did really drill down to see if there was any association. So the two groups do look very well balanced. I can only, as the data is very fresh, I'm only presenting really the kind of headline primary one. So actual help seeking in the past 28 days. Compared to the waitlist control, the intervention group had a significantly higher proportion sought professional help over the previous 28 days at day 28, and they were significantly more likely to have sought professional help over the previous 28 days. So about 1.7 of a ratio of 1.75 to 1. So it looks like if you use the app, it does help motivate you to seek treatment. The only predictor of engagement was injection in the past 28 days at baseline. So they were much more likely, well, they were more likely to engage than people who didn't inject. So again, I'll come to that later about what people's motivation for using this app might be. There wasn't any association with anything else in terms of engagement. Maybe, and we will drill down to this as we analyze the data further through to day 56. But maybe people who are non-heterosexual, who identify as a range of other sexualities, might engage slightly more than people who identify as heterosexual, although that was really of marginal significance in that first pass of the evaluation. We also, our colleagues at Newcastle, so Francis K. Lampkin's team and Jess did some great work in interviewing people by phone, and 25 people were interviewed. And some of the information that we got from that was pretty interesting, I think. So there were two key themes that I'm going to explore. So the first was, what was the audience who the app was targeting and their expectations from the app, and how they felt they did or didn't benefit from the app. So participants believed the app would be most useful for people who are treatment seeking, motivated, or ready to make change, and that was coded 10 times. Others felt that the monitoring function made it really useful for anybody currently using stimulants. That was coded 6 times. And some participants recommended the app for new, inconsistent beginning users, in contrast to those who thought it should be for people who are actually seeking treatment. That was coded 4 times. And still others thought the best audience would be those who are engaged with the service already, coded 2 times. So these are themes that we would really like to drill down to a little bit more as we continue the analysis. The app had appealed to people from LGBTQ communities. That was coded 2 times. In some cases, the app was not considered useful for dedicated or long-term stimulant users. However, participants commented that it was a huge task for an app to address these longer-term patterns of stimulant use. Others felt that the harm reduction approach put forward by the app was a particular strength in engaging people to consider their current stimulant use, filling a gap in the current app market. I won't read the quotes. I'm assuming that you're reading and listening at the same time. Happy to go back to them if you would like. With regards to expectations and engagements with the app, there were good reports of the participants using the app with did engage with the app, coded 18 times. For these participants, app use was regular. The app held their attention and interesting to use. Some participants used the app as a distraction tool when bored or craving, rather than engaging completely with the activities provided in the app, providing some support for the idea that the app could have utility as a tool available over a longer time period than the current study. So that's with a different aim than promoting treatment seeking, but actually helping people change their relationship with methamphetamine use. For other participants, coded 9 times, engagement with the app was affected because of the questions. They're lengthy or repetitive, and as a result, they didn't engage with the app. Importantly, awareness was coded 16 times, with people indicating they're surprised or shocked about the reality of their use once they use the app to track stimulant use. And this is really key to what we were trying to step out to do. And in some cases, this realization prompted help seeking, coded 4 times, and behavior change, coded 7 times. So one participant, the 62-year-old man, said, I've actually spoken to my doctor this morning about my ice use, and I've got an appointment with her on Tuesday of next week. We'll try and book for an alcohol counsellor, I suppose. Functionality was an issue. Okay, so this was a theme with the greatest number of codes. So poor functionality was coded 34 times. Some participants were not able to edit or change the data they'd entered. Others commented on the wheel activity not functioning in line with their expectations. And other participants couldn't access all of the articles of information contained on the app as the files were too large, not compatible with their mobile device, or the links weren't working. So functionality is an issue that I will address with some solutions. But before I get to that, I just my take home from this is that these findings, these preliminary findings are really promising, and it suggests that the app is effective for people who use it in promoting professional help seeking, but we will continue the analysis. It does accept that it's acceptable across a range of people who use methamphetamine, from those using more frequently to less frequently, and different identities and intersectionalities. Putting aside functionality issues, which are real, the feedback was in general very positive. It was useful, it was engaging, it was informative. And as an app with low access barriers, there really is a potential for high coverage, and really is a potential to decrease treatment delays by attracting treatment naive and noting that injection use is positively associated with engagement. We do need to drill down a little bit more about how to understand what the relevance of different types of help seeking is to engaging and using the app. The limitations of the study are numerous, and I will go through some of them here. The first, I guess, is the low retention, which, as I said, was expected, but we do need to do some quite detailed further statistical analysis to account for missing data. And there are growing kind of sophisticated measures and approaches to doing that with, and I'm particularly interested in this longitudinal model where we looked at time to drop out. So when people actually drop out from using the app, and trying to account for the missing data in that way. So Shijin will be working on that in the future. The other important limitations you know, I'm not an app developer, I'm not a tech head, and we like doing pharmaceutical studies. I'm not a pharmacologist either. We do rely on relationships with people that have those skills, and unfortunately the relationships with the developers that we chose keep people left over time, and we really struggled, and there were a lot of errors, and we did have to take the app down at times. I mean, the app went down completely on the day before Christmas at the end of last year, and there was no one even to contact to ask what was going on. There were just constant problems with getting things addressed. And one of the things I guess people are aware with native apps, every time an operating system's changed, then the app has to change as well. So keeping up with that, so that ensuring functionality is pretty much, I think, almost impossible. The biggest bug that we had was the way that the vouchers were loaded into the app meant that when we first launched it back in May last year, people were able to just sit at the computer and completely enter fake data and just download vouchers. And so we 200 or so vouchers just evaporated overnight. So we had to actually pull the app, redesign it, configure the sequencing and start all over again pretty much. And so that put a big delay in what we were doing, but also a challenge to recruitment because of the big recruitment launch that we had started, we had to relaunch and people were less enthusiastic the second time around. The other thing we found with collecting research data through the app, it seems quite simple and straightforward, but we did lose some data, presumably due to internet connectivity. So that it just drops out. And then App Store issues, every time the App Store changes its rules, you have to sign up to the terms and conditions. And as I said, on Google Play, you can't actually forever delete it. Once people have the app on their phone, they've got it. I mean, presumably it'll stop working over time as new operating systems come forward, but that's an issue for apps going forward. So the solution for us for the next step is actually to transition this to a progressive web app. It can be installed, it can be run inside web browsers. People can then use it on their computer as well. It's faster to build and update, and the security is run through HTTPS, which is a bit easier, and the App Store validation update is not required. So that going forward is what we'll be doing with this app. So in conclusion, this app is a novel e-health intervention designed to promote treatment seeking amongst those who may benefit from treatment. And the preliminary findings are promising that the app's an effective and acceptable self-directed behavioural management tool for people who use methamphetamine. I think it's an exciting step as an additional tool towards closing the gap in delayed treatment. It's not a treatment, it's not going to solve everything, and it's not for everybody, but it still will fill a gap in what's already out there in terms of closing the treatment delays. As I said, app functionality is an important limitation, and that will be addressed in the next iteration. And we're hoping to do the next phase is translational research to look at the web-based version of the app, and also to explore it as a clinician-assisted tool. And I know Kerry Chan actually wrote that in the initial grant, that this would be useful for clinicians. So that's where we're going to go with the next step, and potentially work with some of our colleagues that are working with clinicians and e-health. The other exciting place to put this is Eclipse, which is a partnership between the University of Newcastle, Matilda Centre at University of Sydney and New South Wales Health. And that's an online portal for accessing evidence-based online programs for mental health and substance use problems. And that's a New South Wales Health funded development. And Francis has got funding from NHMRC for a partnership grant for this, and as well as Beyond Blue and a New South Wales Health COVID grant to roll out Eclipse across New South Wales, including specific training and support for mental health and drug and alcohol services in each LHD. So inserting this into that whole Eclipse program of work, I think, is a really great opportunity for disseminating it more broadly. And that's the end of what I want to say. Big thanks to Florence, who unfortunately isn't with us today, but she certainly is there to answer any question we've got. And thanks again to all the people that have been involved in the workup of this program from the start.
Thank you very much, Nadine. And we do have Professor Frances K. Lampkin and Jessica Wilson from the University of Newcastle, who were involved in the qualitative data analysis, with us here to participate in Q&A, along with Peter Milton, the manager of the Drug and Alcohol Outpatient Services at St Vincent's. So you're welcome to turn on your cameras if you like. And of course, I encourage participants to use the Q&A function. So I do have a question here, but before I do, Frances, Jessica, or Peter, is there anything that you would like to add to what's been presented thus far?
No, I'm quite happy with what Nadine said. Thank you, Rob.
Brilliant.
Thanks, Rob. Never give me an opportunity to speak, but just to say that I think this is such a critically important advance in the way in which we can encourage people who might be a little pre-contemplative or in that action stage of change for seeking treatment into the right treatment at the right time. And it really is a great demonstration for mine about where the utility of these app and e-health type approaches can fit and intersect with usual treatment services. And I think the results really speak to that particularly. So I know we tend to be a bit cautious and reserved about the results and the impact of what's gone on. And this is what you heard today, but please don't let that take away our cautiousness, take away from the really high potential and the success of this trial and the strength of evidence where this app might fit going forward.
Brilliant. So we've got 3 questions thus far. So from Dr. Susie Hudson, do you think projects like this tell us that AOD treatment providers need to get better about using technology as part of the treatment they provide? And do we need app developers on our teams?
Yes, maybe. Shall I elaborate?
Please.
Yeah, we do. We absolutely. I remember talking to Jack Nagel from Real Drug Talk when we did our webinar series of pivoting to telehealth when the COVID social distancing measures came down last year, and he said finally the healthcare system is being dragged kicking and screaming to where clients want you to be. So we absolutely have to look at really adapting our practice. Most people are using multiple forms of communication, social media, TikTok, Instagram. I mean, emails are last century already. So we really need to be looking at adapting the way that we communicate with people and assist people to assess their relationship with drugs and how they might want to change that relationship. So we must get much more tech savvy, and not just instrumentally as in putting our old programs onto the web in the new way, but actually thinking about ways we can be creative and using the capabilities that are around us. In terms of having app developers on our teams, I'll just go back to that slide. So I think progressive web apps are probably the way of the future. I'm speaking a little bit out of my expertise base here, but certainly our experience with the native apps, I think it's way too complex for health delivery, given the cost involved in keeping up with the changing operating systems and the huge variety of mobile phones that people carry. I do think, yes, we need to bring in IT capacity into our teams in 2 ways. So one in partnership and the other in upskilling ourselves in how to do that. And I used before the analogy of we do pharmacological treatments. I don't know how to make pharmacological. We have a trial of lisdexamphetamine for methamphetamine dependence. I don't know how to make lisdexamphetamine. I don't know how to over-encapsulate it. I don't have any of those skills, and I have to work in partnership with a team that does. And they've let us down too. So we don't have that in-house. That's one of the barriers to actually progressing our field, is that because we don't have much money, and these things are expensive, IT and medications, we need to be building partnerships and perhaps promoting some funding for that primary kind of skill sets for people to work with us. Frances is the expert on this, and she's putting her hand up as well. So I'm handing over to Frances.
I'm actually going to say what she said, but just to reinforce that idea that we don't have to be the ones to be developing these apps and these sorts of tools. And certainly when we go up against the Microsofts and the Apples and the people who have significant commercial funding to develop these whiz bang things, we possibly can't compete with that in terms of keeping people's interest and making them engaged, and also keeping up with these updates and things that Nadine's spoken about as well. But what we can do is understand how best to evaluate what's a good one and a not so good one, and understand how it can either fit into our model of care or it can be used to extend our model of care. So we can do that right now, irrespective of whether we have this app, another app, or or the next greatest thing. As clinicians, I think that's one of our biggest challenges to the integration of these sorts of tools going forward. And that doesn't, we can leave the experts to do all the fandangled program development, which is a technical term, but we ourselves need to be thinking innovatively and creatively about when a treatment episode might start and finish. It's not just being when a person's sitting there in front of us for a particular point in time. And these sorts of technologies open up a range of possibilities for us to do things more efficiently and potentially more effectively. And so, yeah, I think that's probably where we can focus our efforts now.
And I mean, I guess the other thing that we haven't mentioned, I think deliberately from my side, is the idea of commercialization of any of these products, and the kind of the perversion of profit in when you enter that into the equation for these things. And there are a proliferation of for-profit apps, for health apps, as you know, and it can be tempting to try and run these things as a for-profit endeavour, and that's not the path we've gone down. But there will be, I think, growing opportunities for people that might be of a commercial bent to explore the profit motive. I personally think that introduces perversions to the potential therapeutic goals, but it's, again, as Francis said, it's important for us to evaluate what we think, to have the tools to evaluate what works and what doesn't. How do you assess what's a good app and what's not? And that field is growing rapidly now, which is great. When we started this project to do a formal randomized controlled trial and evaluate it, there were no others in the literature, but there's been a proliferation over the past couple of years. So that's really great. We're starting to think more intelligently about what an app can and can't do.
And I think really interesting, and I just wonder, and I can't recall if you talked about it, how does the referral to more intensive treatment options happen, rather than just telling people to contact Addis or something like that? Is there any type of approach for, warm referrals or some type of appropriate referral to more intensive treatment options through app-based?
There could be. That this app wasn't designed as that. It was very much designed to help people motivate themselves and their own seeking of help at wherever they felt was appropriate. But it did have an option to generate a referral letter to GP. And in fact, one of the participants said it would be better if that was a broader kind of, not just for a GP, referred, but just so that saying, that filled the results of the different kind of tools that they'd filled in. So it actually gave the results and made a referral letter that people could then take to someone that they were seeking, that they might want to engage with going forward. But this app was very much about working with people where they are and working with helping people decide what they might want to do next, rather than actually doing something for them.
Sure. So I do have a comment from Fadil at the Ministry. He said, given the app issues you face, the dropout rate isn't surprising.
Thanks, Fadil.
Thanks. We'll take that's a comment rather than a question. And Meredith has asked, do you have any brochures about the app you could send us for our mental health service?
You mean to use the app in your service, or about the findings of the study?
Meredith, I don't know if you wanted to clarify your question for us.
The app is no longer available because this was a research study in itself. Obviously, we're going for future iterations of the app. It will be available again in different formats, but for now, the app is no longer available because it was only available for the length of this study. Right.
And Meredith did just clarify it was to use the app in the service.
Yeah, so that's where I mentioned the Eclipse Portal. So that's the hope, is that the next step is, once we've transitioned this to a web-based app, that it will be much easier and address some of those functionality issues that people have commented on. So the next version would be hopefully more using the same content, but just the functionality improved through a web-based version, and then disseminated for New South Wales anyway, through the Eclipse Portal. Francis, did you want to add to that?
Yes, I think that's one of the things that I think is challenging about the translation of these types of tools outside of a controlled study or clinical setting is who takes charge of the clinical governance around these sorts of tools if it's not part of a research study or a clinic that's offering them. And I guess that's why we see the potential for integration of this tool with the Eclipse Portal, where we've built that around, I guess, the dissemination of that and other online tools. And so, again, I guess speaking to Rob's point a little bit about Eclipse also involves going into mental health and drug and alcohol services and helping those services understand how and where and why you might integrate these tools into your usual care, and hopefully adding S-Check to that suite of options will facilitate that as well.
Great. So we don't have any more questions, but I've had a look through the participant list just to get an idea of who's on, and we've got a good combination of both funders, policymakers and practitioners. Any targeted messages to any of those groups that any of the panel members would like?
Well, just to reiterate what Frances said, we're really excited. I mean, Peter used to have a lot of hair. We've been working on this for a long time. I wasn't grey. I didn't wear glasses. No, we've been working on this a long time because we do believe there's a big gap in helping people identify what might be out there and how to access it and whether they need it, and tracking people's use. I mean, methamphetamine, particularly as a drug, comes with its own, it deletes the off button. So, you know, once you if you're on a run with using methamphetamine, days go past and you don't really notice. So we do think a tool like this can help people in a way that's non-judgmental, that has harm reduction information. We're not saying people should seek treatment if they don't want it at all. Some people integrate their methamphetamine use very functionally into their lives with few harms. So it really is about assessing people's use and harms related to their use, and whether they'd like to seek treatment. And I do think the potential to close that treatment gap is there. And so we are really excited, and this is years and years of work, and we will, the dissemination phase is really exciting for us. The next step, the translation and the dissemination phase.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nadine.
It will need money.
Of course. Frances has her hand raised. Over to you.
As always, there's been a feature throughout this involvement. The fantastic Jess and Florence, who I also see is online now, have been amazing at managing upwards, and I've been advised about the virtual hands up, not the actual hands up. Far out. Learning every day. But I think to the funders out there, of course, where funding is important, but one of the ways we can actually rapidly accelerate access to this tool is if not the end user pays, if services or organisations are able to pay for the platform to be active, to then be offered as part of their service offerings. So that's another way of commercialising access to the tool. We don't want to make a profit out of these sorts of things, but they cost to host, to maintain, and to keep updated, as Nadine's already outlined. Much in the way of, a medication might, to continue to pay to get access to it. It's not a huge amount, but I see that as a really interesting model of funding going forward, where we can continue to collect the evaluation data to make sure it's doing what we want, but then offer a bespoke training and service model or package that involves the S-Check tool, that builds in this clinician assistance component particular to the service that might be funding or licensing the tool. And that is a way that we could potentially make these sorts of tools accessible really, really quickly. And of course, with Eclipse and S-Check as well, additional funding to scale up our efforts to help support services understand and integrate these types of tools and learnings into their services will make Eclipse available beyond New South Wales if there's anybody out there who's interested as well. And of course, that would apply to S-Check too. So I think that we always say more funding's great, but I think there are some really great partnerships and ways in which we could provide a service straight away if there was funding available for a particular service or a group.
Brilliant. Well, I won't put any of our funding participants on the spot with that one, but we do have another question. Oh, it's just disappeared. It's from Dr. Susie Hudson again from NADA. So really interesting that the measures that you've used are the same as being collected routinely in the NGO sector. So also interesting to think about the two different populations, the in-treatment population, the not in-treatment population, and also the remote collection of outcome measures.
Very interesting. And we would love to harmonise outcome measures. I think we're all on the same page with that. And I agree, it would be great if we could collect similar data across various platforms. It does need to be targeted to what we're trying to do, though. So sure. The outcome measure for this is, are people seeking help, not has their methamphetamine use changed? So we need a suite of measures, I guess, is my feeling, but harmonising that suite of measures would be great. Rob, I can turn that question back to you. You might have more to say on that.
Well, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, I think you've kind of answered it in terms of what's the different outcomes for different groups and where they're at with their own, you know, if we're talking about person-centered care and what outcome they're seeking to achieve by engaging. Frances, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I've just been responding to the wonderful Fadil, who I hope has just tuned back in.
So yes, there were some comments, but I think it's gone to all attendees. So I'll leave people to have a look at the comments. So look, we don't have any more questions. So is there any closing comments by any of our panel members?
Just from me, a big thank you to the Ministry of Health for funding this and for funding the whole program of Early Intervention Innovation Fund. These sort of small studies and this real innovation couldn't happen anywhere else without this kind of support. I don't know how else we would be able to do this. So yeah, really, really great to have that support and commitment from our health service.
Brilliant. And yes, Frances? And
to second that, in all seriousness, around the funding by New South Wales Health for both this and Eclipse, which we've spoken about already today. What I love about the investment is that we're providing the service as we're also conducting the research to test its impact. And I think it's both that service provision, the app provision and development, and the hand-in-hand evaluation that's made this funding really important. And this is also one of the few apps, although there's a proliferation of technology-based tools in this area, very few of them are rigorously tested and evaluated to make sure that they do no harm, but also do some good. And so that's why this is what's been extra special about this funding and support from New South Wales Health, and why we're very confident now to go out and try to roll this out and scale this up in other ways. So thank you again.
Awesome. Well, that was also my final comment, was to acknowledge the New South Wales Ministry of Health for the Early Intervention and Innovation Fund. It really has been an amazing fund to support non-government drug and alcohol services, engage with academic partners to do some really amazing work. As I mentioned, this was the 9th in the series. All the previous webinars from previous presentations are on the NADA website, and we have one more webinar to go, which is from EIIF Youth and Community Services, which is an evaluation of their Speak Out dual diagnosis program, and we'll have a date for you for that soon. So I'd like to thank our speakers today. It is really fantastic, and this presentation will be available as well. So thank you very much for your time and for everyone for listening.